Here. All right, we are live. I'm going for it with my. Oh no,
Over
stuff's
the
a little.
last 2 days, long time no chat. It's been so long.
It's been a hot minute, hasn't it? Oh man. Let me
And not too
see
much been
here.
going on over this side.
I think my screen's just a. There we go. Fix that up. All right. We survived election day. Got through it all.
Oh,
Saw
we
you
lost.
guys. I saw you guys. Yeah.
We lost here, but it sounds like you guys did your thing.
We didn't do too bad. Some things could have been a little bit better on the Kansas side, but overall, pretty much what we expected, and maybe even surpassed expectations, keeping Laura Kelly in office as governor instead of electing, a total moron and Derek Schmidt. But hey, big props to Missouri, though.
I know. It's so funny though. I've seen so many memes. It's like y'all got it half right. Like these two states got it half right. You got gambling in one state, weed in the other. So you got the states they have to, you got to cross the borders for whichever vice I guess you're going for. So
Yeah, exactly. You hop over to the state line and buy your gram of weed or whatever, and then pop over on the other side so you can start placing bets and hang out in the
there you
McDonald's the
go.
rest of the day.
Exactly. Like well, whatever. Half right, right?
Right. Yeah,
Yeah, but
I they haven't clarified if like out-of-staters can buy or not. The only rule that was a part of the amendment was you have to be 21.
there's no way they flag you from being out of state.
They
Like,
can't,
because
I
every
mean,
other
yeah,
other state, I was gonna say every other state that's legal, you can just buy it.
right.
You know what I'm saying? There's no way. I mean, that would be a very Missouri thing to do.
Right. That's
Like,
yeah. So I'm half expecting it to happen, but I hope not.
right.
I don't think they can start selling till like February, so still a little bit of time to see what people try to pull off.
Yeah.
Fun
Yeah, it'll be
times.
interesting. I think it's a smart idea, like for the economy. It's a smart idea. It's something that
I mean,
will
it
make y'all a lot of money. You
it
know what I'm
it
saying? It'll make
hurts
it.
no one
Yeah.
because I like what your biggest danger is people driving under the influence. Well, alcohol's legal, so
Well, that's what,
that
yeah, we
yeah,
already
that
have
argument's
that.
out the window. And
And
then after that,
you
it's
already have, well, I was gonna say, you already have people doing that with the weed that's
with the
illegal, with the illegal weed. So,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and besides, like they have medical marijuana over there, so as long as you know a doctor that you can walk in and say, "Hey, doc, I'm anxious about the fact that I don't have a marijuana card," just give you a marijuana card, and then you have it anyways. So
Yeah, what a crazy, crazy
it's
place
something
we live
else,
in.
right?
Pretty
Exactly.
much.
So I'm just really impressed that they voted for it. So it's funny you could watch like on the Secretary of State website, like which places were voting yes and which were voting no, and there were pretty much four places in Missouri that voted yes, and everywhere else was no. It was Kansas City, Columbia, Springfield, which is where Missouri Southern is, and then
Right.
St. Louis. And then everywhere else is just like, no, we don't want this.
Of
It's just so
course.
funny.
Of course. Well,
Oh
anyway,
man, yeah. Well, hey,
let's talk
let's
about
talk
why we're here.
then talk about
Yeah,
happier topics, right?
I know. Well, it's so funny. This was something I was happy about. Like we got the announcement that there's gonna be certain games here, like World Cup and everything. And
Mhm.
me not being a big soccer guy at all, it's like, oh, this is exciting because like all these countries with all these beautiful women are gonna be like hanging out in Dallas and Kansas City. That's as far as I went with it.
Right. Well, and so like that's for 2026, right? So that'll be for the World Cup in 2026, and I'm pumped. I cannot begin to express like just how excited I am for that World Cup.
Oh, you cut out.
Oh, did I? Oh, can
Yeah,
you hear
you're
me now?
back. You're back. You're
All
back.
right, we're back. Yeah.
Yeah, you're
Yeah,
back.
I'm super pumped for the World Cup in 2026, and that'll be the one that's in the US. And I like that one's very, very exciting, even though we don't know yet in Kansas City what teams we'll be seeing. We probably won't know
I
till
don't think anyone knows, right? Yeah, I
yeah,
was
we
like, no
won't know
one knows
until
yet.
2025, because first teams have to qualify, and then they go through the drawing and all that kind of stuff. In all likelihood, it's going to be we won't see the U.S. play here, right? They'll get
Yeah.
games in like New York City or L.A. and that kind of thing. Um, we'll get probably like the Nigeria, the South Korea, the Japan, the you know Vietnam, even if they manage to qualify. Like those really small countries that still are good enough to qualify for the World Cup, but aren't like you know world renowned teams kind of thing.
You think we wait? You think we're gonna get like the bottom barrel teams? Is that what you're saying?
What typically happens, and at least this is like pulling from prior World Cups, is when a country hosts it, they send my
Hear that?
internet. We got a little bit of a storm going on, so my internet keeps going in and out. So just let me know if I drop.
Oh, okay, okay.
Um, so like never before has there been a World Cup that's had as many host cities as this one is going to have. Part of the reason is because just the U.S. already has the infrastructure built and in place in order to facilitate that. Typically, countries don't. FIFA requires stadiums to have X capacity in order to host a World Cup game. And for the most part, countries maybe have two or three stadiums that are about that big. Qatar, for example, does not at all, or did not at all, and that's something we'll talk about. Um, but the U.S., with NFL, and then on top of that, some college stadiums even, and then Mexico and Canada getting the games they're getting, they have, just those couple of stadiums. So it'll be spread out everywhere. So like when it was in South Africa, when it was in England, places like that, it was significantly less stadiums, so the games were a little more concentrated. So it was
Which I'm
more,
not surprised about
yeah, right. Um,
because they're bigger in those places than they are here. So you would think that they would have like a lot more, but I guess they only have like one or two teams.
So actually, it's a little bit the opposite of that. Take the English Premier League, for example, which is without a doubt the richest soccer league in the world. They have 20 teams in their top flight, and then every year the bottom three teams get relegated to the second tier, and then the top three teams from that tier get promoted back up. So you constantly have this like changing league where it's not always the same teams. Now there are like the top 10 teams are pretty much always going to be there kind of thing, whatever. But the EPL has 20 teams. Nine of those 20 teams are from London.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So it's less that it's these are like city-based teams, and it's almost more of like their neighborhood or like super local type teams. It would be like if Kansas City had like a team based in an NFL team based in Westport, one in Brookside, one in North Kansas City, one in Overland Park, that kind of thing. That's essentially what it's like, and that's what it's like for most of Europe. And it's because they have this whole promotion relegation thing. So and again, this is actually going to tie into some things we'll talk about later. People can come in, buy a lower league team, and then just dump a buttload of money into there and get promoted through and suddenly become a top tier team in the EPL, just depending on how much money they spend. But what that also means, though, is that like you'll end up with teams that are smaller in both fan base, wage bill, all that kind of stuff. And so their stadiums can sometimes be just like 20,000 person stadiums, even though they're playing in the EPL.
Gotcha. Okay,
It's
okay.
yeah, it's crazy. It's just a whole different animal. So these countries have to build these stadiums, but the U.S. didn't have to, which is what is a lot of the appeal for having the games here. But because of that, we'll also be massively spread out. So we'll have, even though the Kansas City is hosting some games, we'll probably have like four group stage games, and it'll probably be one group that we have here. Because they have, I think it's like 8 groups in total in the World Cup. I can't remember exactly. So we'll have like one group and we'll have all of their games. And so it'll probably, we'll have one really good team because, that'll be at the top of the pot. And then like two middle tier and then one lower tier team. It's just unlikely that we'll end up with, like the US and Mexico and those ones that have what we would consider massive fan bases in the US because they'll drive them
Sure.
towards places that are more concentrated in those fandoms.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
Now, to
But
be
let's
fair,
go to
that's all wild speculation. May not be true, and we may end up with 12 U.S. games. I mean, I might be
well,
totally wrong.
I was gonna say, what did we do in the 90s, right? Like we had it here in the 90s too, didn't we?
And I think it was mostly in L.A. If I'm
Okay.
remembering correctly, I'd have to go back and check, but it was like mostly on the West Coast. It wasn't spread out like this one's going to be.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, this is like a really unique bid that we had.
Wasn't it Chicago? I think it was Chicago.
It might have been Chicago.
Yeah.
I always mix it up with like, the Women's World
One of the
Cup and then of
major
course the
cities.
Olympics too. Yeah, I never remember, what city hosted what. The only one I for sure remember is Atlanta hosting the Olympics, and that's just because of the bombing that happened there.
Yes, yes, I remember. Well, I don't remember it, but I'm aware of it.
Right. Yeah, we
Yeah,
would have been. That would have been, I think, '96, so we would have been way too young
6 years.
to really remember it.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah, that's the magic of documentaries. But yeah, let's talk about this year.
Let's
Let's talk
talk about
about
this coming year. So, yeah, the big overall topic that I wanted to touch on is just this idea of sports washing. We discussed it real briefly on Tuesday when we were kind of previewing this. I thought, we could just cover what is sports washing exactly, and how it works. And then, of course, like what sports are mostly impacted at this time. Kind of feed that over into the World Cup itself, talking about what's happening over in Qatar, or Qatar. There's multiple ways to pronounce it. I think they actually came out and said they don't like it when people say Qatar because it sounds too much like gutter, which uh, honestly kind of just drives me to want to say it more. Um,
the
and for many reasons. But so
right.
there's multiple ways to pronounce that. If you do pronounce it differently, that's totally fine. Plenty of it's just like those kind of countries that have a completely different alphabet than us, so you're never going to get their
Sure,
name right. We'll talk about that, and then we'll talk about how like all of this can wrap into like the NFL itself, America as a whole, and what kind of impact we would see over here. So
absolutely.
yeah, and
This, this will be an enlightening experience for me because this is not something I was familiar with going in.
and I figured like I could like handle a lot of the talking points, and then just you grab those questions. If a question comes up, just hit it, and I'll see if I can answer,
Sure.
and if not, I'll just see if I can quickly research it.
See what the Google say.
Exactly. For those of you watching the stream or even listening to the podcast after the fact, in the description below, I went ahead and linked the main articles I used when I was doing all my research here. I think it was about 10 or 12 different articles. So those are all below. You can fact check me on those, question them if you want to. As always, please leave a comment, and I'm more than happy to reply to that. Or if you're in the chat itself, shoot us your questions too. So sports washing itself, Wikipedia, which I love using for everything. And I know it's one of those things that people will cringe at sometimes, but I do feel like it's now at a very safe point where you can use it to reference a lot of deals, especially when it comes to definition. Define sports washing as the term to represent the practice of individuals, groups, corporations, or governments using sports to improve relationships or reputations tarnished by wrongdoing. We see this most prominently in the form of both corporations or state actors. I know inside of the United States it's not as prevalent, but of course across seas, if you're ever watching a soccer game, you'll frequently see the front of jerseys represented by a corporation.
Yeah.
So sports washing you can almost boil down to as simple as seeing a name on the front of a jersey and relating that to your team, and like the good things about your team must also mean the good things about that kind of corporation, right? Gazprom, when it comes to corporations, is an absolutely fantastic example this year. Gazprom is a Russian state-owned energy company. They sponsored a multitude of teams, most prominently Schalke 04 and Germany's Right now, they're in the second tier. They're usually in the first tier of soccer. Massive sponsorship there with everything that's been going on in the Ukraine and Russia's invasion of that country and starting the war there. Gazprom has received a lot of criticism, but before this year, people didn't really criticize Gazprom that much, and a lot of it is related to the fact that they were a huge sponsor of not just teams like Schalke over in Germany, but they were hugely represented in Spain, France, and England as well. Qatar Airways, which is the state-owned airline company for the country hosting the World Cup this year. They're most famous for representing the front of FC Barcelona's jersey, as well as plenty of other jerseys. AIA actually
That is one I'm
sponsors.
super familiar with.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
as a more casual, I would say, soccer fan. Yeah, Barcelona. That's one of the most recognizable ones.
hmm And pretty much like if you've bought a Barcelona jersey in the last 10 years, you own one that says Qatar Airways on the front of it.
Yeah.
So if you were to ever have bought like a Messi jersey or any of the other individuals that have played there, you own a Qatar Airways sponsored piece of wear. AIA actually sponsors the team I cheer for, Tottenham Hotspurs. They're a financial company based out of Hong Kong that have received a lot of flack for being very pro-Chinese government.
Mm,
Shell Corporation, if we want to bring that here at home, the oil company, of course, has had a ton of issues with like oil spills, environmental damage, all that kind of stuff. You can see them represented all across Europe as well.
mm.
So the whole idea with this is that like a corporation buys the right to be on the front of a shirt. They can even own a stadium. Spotify actually just bought naming rights to Camp Nou, which is the stadium that Barcelona plays at. We can bring this here to the NFL even. Forever and ever we called it Arrowhead, but now its official name where the Chiefs play is GH Field at Arrowhead.
What?
Um, yeah, the company I work for, Empower, actually owns the naming rights for the Denver Broncos Stadium, so it's Empower Field at
Oh,
Mile High Stadium.
yes.
Uh, sorry.
No, yes,
Yeah,
yes. When you said that, I was like, oh, okay, them. Okay, yeah, yeah.
yeah, exactly. And so that's a lot of what sports washing is, right? Is like getting that name recognition, and then because you recognize it because it's associated with the Denver Broncos or the Kansas City Chiefs or with FC Barcelona, you don't immediately think negative thoughts about those groups and owners, unless they commit some super atrocious thing, that happens to pop up in the news. Think, when the BP oil spill was happening in the Gulf of Mexico, you don't immediately associate them with those kind of bad acts. You instead associate them with those sports teams and think positive about them almost. Or in the
Sure.
case of the Denver Broncos, you think, wow, you guys wasted a bunch of money on Russell Wilson, didn't you?
Yeah, it's not. We're not gonna troll them.
No, it's definitely not.
That's right. Anyway.
I,
Oh, so my question, I do have a
yes,
question for
please.
that. So how would you differentiate this from just general consumerism, commercialism, capitalism, whatever you want to call it? Because you
Yeah.
know what I mean?
And it's almost in that weird spot where it's hard to separate the two. The way you have to look at it, though, is where those corporations were at before they were tied with whatever product, right? So when it comes to like, GEHA field, say that one 10 times fast, Empower, Mile High, those kind of things. Think of those more as like branding opportunities. Spotify with Camp Nou, all those are opportunities for a corporation looking to just expand their brand. They've never been associated with a negative act. Almost exclusively, none of these are state-owned companies. Things like that. It's just more about a company trying to get their name out and set a bunch in prime time in front of millions and millions of viewers. They're spending an incredible amount of money to do it. They're doing it obviously so that they can drive profits, things like that. So whatever negative or positive opinion you may have about all of it, it's usually done for the reason of just expanding their brand.
Right.
On the flip side, when it comes to things like Qatar Airways and Gazprom, the way those are really different is that both of those are owned by the actual country that they're in. So Gazprom by Russia, Qatar Airways is owned by Qatar. They're not just trying to build their brand and representation, but they're also trying to disassociate sometimes, or try to make you forget about the fact that they're technically, a representation of that country. So Russia's always, we had an entire Cold War over where Russia was the bad guy in our Western minds, right? The quote unquote bad guy. So Gazprom's whole mission with buying these sponsorship opportunities, the front of jerseys, things like that, is to get you to focus more on the fact that they're associated with those teams and with those brands that we see in a positive light because they're, Western represented teams or products that we like to cheer for. So Gazprom wants you to associate with them. They don't want you to associate Gazprom with Russia. And then the same thing
Right.
with Qatar Airways is that they want you to associate them with Barcelona. They don't want you to associate them with Qatar.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah, the real key to the whole definition is improve reputations tarnished by wrongdoing, right? So if like right after the oil spill that BP did in the Gulf, if they were to then go out and immediately buy, say, the naming rights to the Patriots Stadium, so the idea is that every time Patriots had a professional or a primetime game, and then you had Chris Collinsworth say, "Hey, we're here at BP Stadium at what is the name of their stadium? Oh goodness,
Thought it was
Foxborough." Um,
yes.
so it's like here we are at BP Field at Foxborough kind of thing. And then you suddenly start to forget that the oil spill is happening and their fault, and more associate them with they're the place that the Patriots play at, that
Right.
kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, it's it's a PR thing. It's a definitely a PR move. It sounds like um these companies, they're just trying to clean their image, which
Hmm.
um I would say to that, is that not something you as a company would try to do if
Oh,
you were into some trouble?
absolutely, absolutely, yeah. And by no means like when it comes to the negative side of sports washing, and why it's a bad thing and why you separate it from things like PR stunts or just trying to build your brand and all that is less when a corporation gets involved into it and more when the other group, specifically state actors, start to get involved in it. And so that's
Gotcha.
a perfect segue into something else. Now,
Sure.
I'll just ask you this as a quiz question, and if you don't know the answer, no big deal. But you know that famous photo of oh heck, why am I doing this to myself now? Uh,
You not know the quiz question.
no, it's what was his name? Oh my gosh, why am I doing this? I need 2 seconds because
And
I am
you can't
I
top
am
that
just in
famous photo.
freaking Jesse Owens of Jesse Owens. I was like I was Jesse. What was his last name? Jesse Owens. But you know that famous photo of Jesse Owens at the Olympics, or he's raising his hand, Black
Yeah.
Power, all that kind
Oh,
of
of
stuff.
course.
Do you know
Yes,
what
of course.
country that was held in?
Germany, right?
Nazi Germany.
Yeah, Germany. Yeah. No, I definitely know that one.
So, sports washing as a whole is not a new concept by any means. It's been around forever. Nazi Germany pushed to be able to hold the Olympics so that they could use it as a worldwide platform to show the world just how great it is to live in Nazi Germany. Of course, now we're almost 100 years on from World War II and getting to the point where it's like, okay, yes, Nazi Germany was bad. But at the time, especially in America, there was no intention whatsoever for America to get involved in any international conflict. And World War II hadn't even technically started yet. It was like right on the brink and precipice of happening, but it took us, an extra 4 or 5 years or whatever it was once the war did start for the US to get involved. And it's because we were a heavily isolationist kind of country. And we also had a massive amount of Nazi sympathizers in the United States, more than
Hmm.
you would ever think. And a lot of
What?
Sorry.
At the time, well, I was just saying at the time they were actually winning people over. I
And
mean,
yeah,
propaganda, as we know, like you know what I'm saying. They weren't really seen as the monsters that they're known as today,
the,
right?
exactly. And a lot of that is because the Olympics were held there. Tons of people
Yes.
went over for the Olympics, saw how great life was in Nazi
Gotcha.
Germany, and
Yes.
because of that, it really helped build sympathy across the world.
I see
Um,
what you're.
yeah.
Okay. I see what
Mussolini did
you're
the
saying
exact same thing with the World Cup. I think it was 1937, 38, something like that, in Italy to show off how great life was in fascist Italy at the time. Um, which, fun fact, I think that was actually the first World Cup where a hat trick was scored, and the first hat trick scored in a World Cup was done by an American.
Oh, the more you know. Who was
The more
that?
you know. I honestly can't tell you their name. But funny enough, America was like an absolute powerhouse in soccer back then, and a lot of the reason is because sports like football, basketball, and whatnot hadn't taken over
Had,
huge.
yeah, hadn't really taken off yet.
Yep. So, a lot of people were playing soccer that would later go on instead to, play higher paying sports. So yeah, you think about it like that, and then you start translating it into modern day times now. It's shown to work in the past. Of course, we don't look positively on fascist Italy and Nazi Germany and all the other happenings back then, but at the time, it did build a lot of sympathy, and that's kind of what state actors now use and try to depend on in order to build positive thoughts. Um, the big one that happened right before, like all the World Cup stuff that's been coming out lately, has been kind of murmured about prior, is what was it? I think it was late last year. Saudi Arabia, they have a fund, and I can't remember the full name of it, but I think it's called the PIF, and essentially it's state-backed funding with the intention of going around and investing in things all around the world in order to not just grow the wealth of the royal family in Saudi Arabia, but also to help build their image all around the entire globe. Newcastle United is a team that is in the English Premier League. They've had a horrific history with the owner at the time, a guy named Mike Ashley, who was also an individual who is participating in sports washing. He owned a corporation, and I believe it was a series of grocery stores, but he was well known as the owner of these stores to just be an absolute garbage human being, but made a lot of money with these stores and, like the advantage he took of people and all the different like just terrible acts that he did in order to grow his business. He took that money and bought Newcastle United, and through
Mm,
Newcastle United, helped soften his image. Well, it got to a point where he wasn't really treating the team very well, all that kind of stuff, and fans just wanted him out. They wanted him out so bad that when Saudi Arabia came in and said, "Hey, we will buy the team from you," um, fans were ecstatic, right? Like you wouldn't think, like a Western fan group, would let something like Saudi Arabia walk in and just be like, "Hey, we want to buy your team. How do you all feel about that?" And they were all very, very, very excited and happy about it
that's
in
how
ways
you
that were
know.
just very, very unappealing. Things,
How you know you fucked up.
yeah, right, exactly. And things to remember is that like Saudi Arabia's always had a little bit of a negative image, right? I feel, especially in the West. A lot of the reason why we don't think of them as poorly as other countries in that region is because we have been allied with them for so long. We have a Ramco based out of Saudi Arabia that provides us with a ton of oil every year. And whenever we do, the two times we have gone over to handle Iraq and the two wars, the two Gulf Wars, we used Saudi Arabia as a staging ground, and because they would let us in there, and they were kind of our allies. So we've always had a little bit of a more positive view of Saudi Arabia compared to the rest of the Middle East, but it's still seen overall as negative. On top of that, this is shortly after Jamal Khashoggi. For those of you who don't know about him, Jamal Khashoggi was a Saudi native, and a journalist who frequently wrote very negative and condemning things about the ruling family. So much so that he had to leave the country. And he fled the country to Turkey, which doesn't have an extradition treaty with Saudi Arabia, and hid there. Kept himself. He had to keep himself secret because he was so worried about what the Saudi government was going to do. I think it was in 2020. It might have been 2019, but I believe it was 2020. Khashoggi wanted to get married. Being a Saudi national, he had to go to the Saudi embassy in order to do this. Went to the Saudi embassy and never left.
Mm.
It's never been officially confirmed, but even the CIA has released documentation saying that without a doubt, the Saudi government ordered the assassination and carried it out of this individual.
Yeah, I was gonna say never left. There's no documentation of him ever leaving.
Hmm. Yeah,
That's a hit.
yeah.
That's definitely a hit.
Yeah, I mean, it was done so blatantly that, like, while there's technically no evidence, even the CIA is willing to put on the line that the Saudi Arabian government, without a doubt, assassinated this guy. So this is a regime that doesn't believe in free press, won't let women drive cars, um, have incredible, tightly controlled, religious-based, and poorly interpreted religious-based laws, with a police force that enforce those laws. LGBT rights aren't. There are none in Saudi Arabia. And all of these just awful negative things that you could look up, if you were to just do a Google of anything Saudi Arabia controversy. They were allowed to come in and buy a team in the English Premier League. So now they're the owners of Newcastle United and can pour in a ton of money into Newcastle United and let them, grow as a team. Fans,
Well,
ever since the acquisition happened last year, fans have been showing up in like traditional Arab dress in order to celebrate their new owners. They've held up banners celebrating their new owners. And then, heavens forbid, you go on Twitter and criticize the owners while tagging Newcastle United, because you will have people coming out of the woodworks criticizing you back.
and so this team is pretty good then.
And that's it, right? Is they weren't good.
They
Poorly
weren't
run by
good.
Mike
Okay.
Ashley. Barely clawed their way up to the English Premier League from a lower tier.
It's
But
just okay, I see what you're saying.
yeah,
Like okay, so here's my like this is
no, please,
I'm gonna come with it. I'm gonna come with this
I love it.
analogy. It's like the Dark Knight, right? When
Uh,
the mob turns to the Joker. Like it was so bad before they had to turn to something worse.
exactly, exactly. One thing to remember about most European and just, I think, soccer leagues in general outside of the United States is they don't have things like a salary cap. So when a state
Oh,
actor comes in, especially a state as rich as Saudi Arabia is, they can pour an obscene amount of money into acquiring players, paying them whatever the heck they want, and at that point in time, change the team. Which I think last year they finished around, oh gosh, I'm pulling this, like 12th out of 20 teams. They're currently
mm,
in third place in the EPL,
oh,
and they're likely to finish there, and that's huge.
yeah.
One of the teams they're
That's a big,
competing with in that top three spot is Manchester City. I mean, anyone who's a passive sports fan probably knows about Manchester City
yeah. You
and
know,
how
Manchester.
good they have been. 12
Right.
years ago, Manchester City was in tier two play of the, English soccer system. They were, I mean, they weren't even in the Premier Division. They were a tier or two below it. And then Abu Dhabi's royal family came in, bought the team, set up what they call the city ownership group. I think I have this on my next slide, but I'll go ahead and talk about it here. And have since just exploded this team from being a bottom of the barrel, barely able to survive in tier two play of English soccer, into what is arguably the greatest soccer team in the world.
Mm,
And it's because they could go in there with the incredible amount of funds that an entire country would have as the royal ruling family of this country, and spend money unbelievably. It's so much so that there will be times when they're playing in, like, non-league tournaments, or even within the league itself, where one or two players on Man City's team earns a higher wage than the entire other team's starting 11 does.
That's wild.
And it's because these teams don't have a salary cap.
Yeah.
It's kind of like baseball or the NBA around here.
I was gonna say it sounds like an argument for the salary cap.
It is, in my opinion. Uh, of course, over there they just hate the idea of a salary cap, and a lot of it is because you put in a salary cap, it will make it harder for teams to promotion and relegate out of the league.
Yeah.
While the salary cap would help prevent these, like state actors and whatever from coming in and just spending a buttload of money, and you have the haves and have-nots constantly. It does just hurt the bottom end of it all. So there's reasons to have it, reasons to not have it. That's a whole different sidelines discussion we could have some other time if we ever wanted to.
The salary cap, I'm totally down. That'd be an interesting
Yeah.
discussion.
So that's Saudi Arabia, and that's when it comes to just a regular division team owned by a country.
Right.
Qatar, on the other hand, has come in and done this for the World Cup.
For the World Cup, yes, sir.
So instead of buying a team, and on Tuesday I teased about it a little bit. It's actually not true that there's any proven link between all the corruption issues FIFA has had is tied to Qatar. So we should put that out there. There's no legally, it has not been found, kind of the same way that legally O.J. Simpson didn't kill his wife.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, there we go. I mean, hey,
it,
yeah, that's the disclaimer, people.
that's
Like take that as you want to take it.
right. Um, so we should be totally clear about that. But Qatar's this tiny nation, has almost no footprint when it comes to soccer whatsoever. Their team has barely ever even qualified for the World Cup. I think the rules are in order to host it, you have to have qualified for the World Cup that is currently going on when the bid is made, and the bids happen like 10 years in advance, kind of deal, right? Um, so at the time, Qatar had managed to sneak into the World Cup, mostly because the Asian conference is pretty weak when it comes to nations and soccer. So it's easy to slip in there if you can. Um,
Sure.
got qualified in order to host it, and now is hosting it. They don't even really have like a premier division or anything like that when it comes to soccer in Qatar. So that, I mean, that would essentially be like the Super Bowl being held in Australia. You know, like a country that has almost nothing to do with soccer is now suddenly hosting the biggest soccer
The
competition in the
biggest
entire
soccer.
world. Yeah,
That's a good
everyone's like,
analogy.
what the heck's going to happen here? Earlier I was talking about how, like, in the United States we have the NFL, we have all these stadiums built, everything.
Yeah,
We have the infrastructure in place to essentially host a tournament. Qatar
they
had
don't.
zero stadiums at the time that they won the bid that were
Right, and that's why we're having this in December, right? And that and the weather, isn't that correct?
it's mostly weather related. Yes.
Okay.
First time ever that the World Cup has to be held over winter because the country that's hosting it is literally too
Too
hot to
hot.
handle in the summer. Yes.
Wild, wild.
Yeah. Yeah, not good. There's a lot of reasons it's not good, mostly because all the premier divisions in Europe, in which, frankly, Europe is what matters when it comes to soccer, are mid-season. This is
Right.
almost a lot of the reason why the U.S. has had struggles in the past when it does come to the World Cup, is the MLS has their season um, during the World Cup. So all of our
Okay.
players that come from the MLS, and the majority of them will typically do that, they're mid-season, they're worn and torn, the
Yeah.
injuries are prevalent, all that kind of stuff. The exact
It's
same
like
thing. I'm sorry.
it's like in the NBA trying to have the players play it during in the FIBA league
Yeah,
during the season. Yeah,
yeah,
no,
exactly.
I'm definitely familiar with that.
Yeah. So the exact same issues that you would run into with, like, FIBA, and then also with the MLS during the World Cup is not going to be happening with the top five leagues in the world, where they're having to
Hmm.
like stop their league early. They're having to postpone the restart after winter break longer, and already I can name a few names off the top of my head, but the number of just all-star caliber players that are now having to miss the World Cup because they received, I mean, they rolled their ankle this week while playing a game is just insane. Human Sun is one of the greatest examples. He's without a doubt the greatest Asian player alive right now. Um, Plays for South Korea, has like single-handedly won South Korea medals in, like the Asia circuit when it comes to national duty. Like this guy is just unbelievable, and he's one of my favorite players to watch. Fractured his eye socket and will not be able to play in the World Cup now.
Oh, how did
Um,
you do that? He got hit with a ball or something?
I think it was somebody's elbow. Yeah, just took it.
Somebody's
And, I mean,
elbow.
and it's one of those injuries that like if the World Cup was happening in the summer, they would usually have 3 to 6 weeks off in order to recuperate before the World Cup would start. But instead, because they would only have like about a week break in between, their league games ending and the World Cup starting, he has no shot of being able to recover in time to play in the World Cup. So there's going to be a whole lot of names that are going to be missing from this World Cup that I think are going to shock people. They're going to be like, why is this it's like I know X soccer player. Why is X soccer player not here? Well, they'll find out it's because the guy broke his toe or something,
Yeah.
just
So
in regular league play.
so honestly, and I get what you're saying. I know we haven't really dived into kind of
The more nitty
sorry,
gritty. Uh-huh.
yeah, the more nitty-gritty, but so far it's not really looking too favorable for them anyway, as far as like an image.
And
Like
yeah,
with the disaster is like, having to move to winter, like you got players hurt, you've got, and of course we're going to get into the real nitty-gritty of why it's even worse. But yeah, so far it doesn't, and they didn't have the infrastructure to begin with.
didn't have it to
So
begin with. Yep.
yeah, yeah, so far it's not looking good
Yeah, and so
in this
this is
country.
why, things like sports washing are important to talk about now, is because
Sure.
of these like little tiny things that, like you're saying, already look bad, are made worse, but they're still going to get away with a positive looking image because they hosted the World Cup, you know. Now,
Right.
other reasons why it matters now, compared to things like Nazi Germany doing it or Mussolini's Italy. What I think Argentina held it while the military junta was going on in the 70s. They hosted the World Cup then too to improve their image. Absolutely insane. Why it matters now is social media. Social media is
Yeah,
huge, huge now, and it makes it easier to spread your image around the world. It's already
absolutely.
started to come out that in all the major countries that have huge representation when it does come to soccer, so I'm talking like Germany, a lot of the Nordic countries, England specifically, Australia, the United States, these huge Western cultures, it's coming out that the Supreme Committee in Qatar that's responsible for running the World Cup is paying upwards of like 2026 fans to say and do positive things on social media, giving them an all expenses paid trip to Qatar in order to purely post positive propaganda back to their friends at home that they can then point to and say, hey, look, this guy's from, Kansas, this guy's from Texas, this guy's from London, this guy's from, wherever. They're saying positive things. They must be doing good. While those guys are over there on a free trip, and the only reason they're getting it for free is because they promised to say positive stuff.
Influencers.
It's insane. Yeah, no World Cup has
Influencers.
ever had to do that. Russia didn't even have to have this when they held the World Cup like 8 years ago. They didn't even have to do this, but Qatar is having to.
And it's easier than ever to even get people to sign up for something like that too, because everyone wants to be an influencer, right? So
Absolutely.
it doesn't matter if they use the product or not, or the aware of anything going on with the
hmm
country.
There have been some fans that have come out and said, especially since they've like started to go over there, said they saw what was going on or they've heard more about what was going on, and they've started to reject the all expense paid trip because they like it was to the point where it was just uncomfortable enough for them to turn down a free trip to the World Cup with
Okay,
how
so
bad
we do
things have
have
been
some
going on.
people.
So yeah, this is why we're hearing about it, because typically we probably wouldn't have heard about this, but just with how negative it has been, people are like saying, "Oh no, I'm rejecting this trip." Also, I'm going to go tell other people that you did this kind of thing. Um, on top of that, fans as a whole have proven to show up for these, sports washing, soft powered attempts and represent everything in a positive light. Russia is a really great example of when the World Cup was held there 8 years ago. A lot of positivity was coming out. It's like, oh, these stadiums are awesome, or it's like, hey, it's not too bad around here. Good things kind of going on. You didn't hear anything really negative happening in Russia during their World Cup. On top of that, Newcastle specifically, when we were talking about Saudi Arabia, they're coming to games praising the ownership, everything, saying all these good things about MBS, positivity, life is good. We don't have Mike Ashley anymore. We have these awesome, awesome people that are based in Saudi Arabia, helping us grow our team. That's sports washing. Boom, right there is the fact that these people are showing up to games and just praising their owners and like just all but worshiping these guys.
Right.
They've converted these people to being fans of Saudi Arabia because they bought their sports team. And it's just going to be the same thing when it comes to the World Cup. Is like, okay, you're holding the World Cup, that means you're awesome, kind of deal. Lastly, a great example too. Again, focusing on Newcastle, I think a lot of it is just because of how relevant it is to this whole situation. It's an Arab country impacting Western countries. All the all the different reasons you can relate Saudi Arabia buying Newcastle to Qatar holding the World Cup. MBS, who is the leader of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, um, even warned Boris Johnson, who was the UK Prime Minister at the time, and this is back last year when uh, Saudi Arabia was looking to buy Newcastle. He warned Boris Johnson that if Boris Johnson didn't help get the purchase of Newcastle through, that it would negatively impact England's relationship with Saudi Arabia. So this is one country's leader threatening another country's leader with poor diplomatic relations in order to acquire a sports team.
That's wild.
Yeah. So that's why all of this stuff
That's
is
funny.
super important to have in mind.
Corruption at its finest.
Corruption at its finest. All right. So now that we know what sports washing is and some of the examples of it lately, we wanted to talk specifically about the FIFA World Cup. I had a
Absolutely.
few big things to talk about. First and foremost, when it does come to Qatar, though, and you were touching it on it earlier, they have zero infrastructure when it comes to building the World Cup or
Sure.
to hosting it. You can go up and look online. It's gotten to the point where they have just like officially stated they don't have enough hotels for the fans alone that'll be traveling to these
Right.
games. It's so bad that they are offering free airplane rides from other neighboring countries for people to stay in hotels in places like Saudi Arabia or Jordan or any of the relatively stable places. Do not stay in Yemen right now, um, kind of thing.
I don't
They're
know.
offering free airplane shuttle rides for fans to stay in hotels in other countries, and they will fly you into Qatar in order to watch games because they simply don't have enough hotels. On top of that, they've been buying cruise ships and parking them at docks in order to use as temporary hotels. So it's entirely possible that you get a hotel to watch the World Cup in Qatar and show up and find out you're in the bottom of a cruise ship boat that's stuck on a dock. Or the latest and greatest thing that I've seen is shipping containers that they've set up into like makeshift villages where you can pay like $200 a night to be spinning inside of a shipping container.
Joy.
So
Oh,
not just yeah,
they'll just market it as an Airbnb. Like, oh, that's great. You know what I'm
I,
saying?
it's so bad. Like not only do they not have the stadiums, they just don't have places for fans to stay, and they're scrambling to find anything right now. It's awful. Um, because of the fact that they've had to do like all these temporary villages or even just build the stadiums. And on top of that, the stadiums had specific requirements, not just for capacity, but also because even winter in Qatar is still something like 90 degrees heat. There has to be just sufficient air conditioning, not just for the fans, but also for the players, in order for them to be able to make it through a game. the important thing to remember about the World Cup is it's not like a one game a week for teams. It's one game pretty much every 3 days. So players are already exhausted, even in the best of conditions. You throw them into 90-degree heat in order to play, bad things are going to happen.
Not gonna
Yeah. So you can probably expect quite a few injuries to all stars to happen all throughout this tournament. Meaning, a country that
all
you think's
stars.
gonna win probably won't
I'm think
win. Yeah,
all stars. I'm thinking like fans are gonna go missing. It's gonna get
it's
ugly.
gonna be crazy. So they've had to bring in a ton and ton of migrant workers, specifically from places like India, Bangladesh, and other areas around that India sphere of influence when it comes to South Asia. Cutter practices a thing that a lot of things, and I'm trying to think of the right way to say this. Practices a system called the kafala system, I think is how it's pronounced, that a lot of developing countries utilize. And what that system is that essentially because your own country doesn't have just the pure amount of unskilled labor necessary in order to complete massive construction projects, you import workers from typically India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, those kind of countries. It comes with a little bit of negativity, though. So the kafala system is essentially the practice of bringing in private citizens from another country and then trapping them into your country. Typically with the promise of, certain wages,
Sure.
um, promise to them certain care given to them. It's like, okay, you're coming here to work temporarily. That means we'll house you. Well, all expenses paid. We're going to pay you. Uh,
Something better than they get at their country.
yeah, where they are currently. Um, all that. And so it's a sponsorship in order to bring these individuals in to a country that they have no idea. And then what happens traditionally is that the government powers that are overseeing these migrant workers, and this has been incredibly rampant in Qatar recently, is they take away their passport, they take away their visas, they don't pay them, and they trap them there. So without a passport or visa, you can't leave the country.
They get back
Um,
up.
you can't get any money because they're not paying you, so you're trapped there anyways. It essentially turns away from you being a worker and into you being a slave. And you're trapped there. And they keep promising, oh, we'll send your family money. Oh, well, we'll sponsor you to stay here. Oh, we'll give you citizenship if you work here for 2 years, that kind of thing. All of it lies. Just absolute horseshit lies. Does not happen and is not happening whatsoever. And it's been exposed. So it's essentially legal slavery, depending on whose laws you're following. And then um, they're trapped there. They're unable to leave. And because they're, frankly, foreign workers, they don't really care about their safety too much. One of the
These
big issue,
numbers.
one of the big issues that has been coming out is the exposure of how many deaths have been happening with these migrant workers. To,
Yeah. 6,500 is insane.
you'd expect a few deaths at a construction site, even in the best world, right? Even in the United States, a strict union type of place, lots of safety, death happens because construction is an incredibly dangerous job. Well, Qatar doesn't really have unions. They don't really have safety measures, and they're pretty much all unskilled labor. So in 2021, The Guardian, which is a liberal magazine over in England, and
Sure.
it owns that, it knows that, reported that there have been since 2014 6,500 deaths. Qatar refutes this a little bit. Of course, they say there have been only 37 deaths when it comes
Oh,
to migrant workers. I still,
slightly off.
I mean,
Slightly off.
if you ask me, I think 37 is still a little unacceptable. 6,500
Oh,
though,
a thousand. No, absolutely. No, 100%. No, obviously. Yeah. Like
it's
yeah,
bad. Yeah, 6,500 is inexcusable, and
it's
there's
insane.
that alone should be reason for Qatar to not have the World Cup.
Yeah.
Um, Now, the International Labor Organization, which I believe operates through the UN, has released an official estimate of about 50 deaths just in 2021 alone. So you can probably take that as about an average since 2014, 50 deaths. That's what we're looking at 6, 7 years there, 7 times 50. You're riding close to 400 people dead from constructing these stadiums. That's probably a safe estimate. So 65 is probably a little overblown. 37 is definitely not true. And what
Right.
has happened is that the International Labor Organization has come out and said that it turns out Qatar, when it's releasing these like official death reports, is not considering things like heart attack, stroke, or dehydration as
So
a
it's probably a lot
work-related
more.
deaths. Um,
Yeah.
Funny enough, when it turns out that you're overworked in the sun and 100+ degree heat, leading causes of death tend to be heart attack, stroke, and dehydration.
Dehydration.
So yeah, it's what Cutter is counting as a death when it comes to these construction workers is like when a brick falls on someone's head and kills them. They're not considering the symptoms of a larger problem as a reason for death of these migrant
So
workers.
so the Guardian, that number is what they're considering, right?
Yeah,
Or do you think it's even higher than that?
so is the Guardians is probably. I don't know exactly what metric they've been using, but theirs is likely a little embellished. A lot of the speculation is that the Guardian was measuring just migrant deaths, period. So, if somebody was to go out and get a drunk driving accident or, whatever, one of those kind of things, there is speculation that the Guardian is either intentionally or unintentionally counting that as a death related to the World Cup. Fair play, because if the migrants over there to build the stadium for the World Cup when you typically wouldn't be over there, you can kind of see why they would count that. But usually it's for, or a lot of the deaths that they are counting can be considered for things that are unrelated to the actual construction of these stadiums.
Sure.
So it's
Wow.
pick which side you want to land on. I think
Somewhere in between.
yeah, exactly.
I mean, probably I would say, I mean, just depending on like, what they're reporting, it's probably a lot closer. That Guardian probably has a lot closer than not.
Guardians
Um,
is going to be way more accurate than
yeah.
Cutters is. Yeah.
The sheer fact that, like you said, including, there's only including like literal machine accidents or like, hardware accidents
Hmm.
versus like stuff related to the conditions,
Yeah.
which they could try to wipe away and say, oh, it's just like a pre-existing health conditions or something like that.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. It'd be like
Like COVID
right. So because of course Qatar is only releasing this 37 as the official count, people who are willfully ignorant kind of latch onto that and say, well, hey, the country's saying, yeah, 37 people have died. Not great, but it's not as bad as what this liberal rag is saying, or it's not as bad as what the UN is saying, all that kind of stuff, and that's just an
Sure.
example of sports washing right there.
Absolutely. Well, damn.
Yeah, so that alone is the reason why Qatar shouldn't host the World Cup, and a
Yeah.
part of the reason why I will not be watching the World Cup. Another
So
reason, oh, sorry.
I would say, okay, well, no, let's get to your next reason first before anything else.
Yeah, another reason is LGBTQ plus rights.
Gotcha.
Now, I mean, to say Qatar is a conservative country is being kind.
A little bit of understatement. A little bit.
A little bit of an understatement. Their laws are absolutely incredibly outdated when it does come to the LGBTQ plus, you know, group of individuals out there. In most of the time, and but not exclusively, but almost exclusively, is where it comes in for men, gay, homosexual men, or even trans men transitioning to women. Uh,
Sure.
Whenever a man is essentially involved in this, is where a lot of the harsh penalties are. They're not kind to women either, but that's almost more of a, oh, hey, this happens to be here. believe me, there are a lot worse things going on for women as a whole in that country that's not just related to sexuality, right?
Sure.
This is a huge issue, especially for men, but also for women. The laws themselves are based off of horrific and inaccurate interpretations of the Quran. They are a heavily Muslim country. They do follow those same kind of interpretations that terrorist organizations kind of follow when it comes to the Quran. And if in the country of Qatar you are caught committing some form of a homosexual act, be it anything from kissing to full on rounding the bases, that's 7 years in prison and fines levied on top of you. And their
Mm.
prisons are not anywhere as nice as ours are over here in the
Right.
United States. 7 years in
Nice.
prison over there is probably a life sentence a lot of the times.
Yeah. And good luck.
And that's if you even get released in 7 years. Um, that's on the assumption that you're caught committing a homosexual act. If you're just a known homosexual over there, the Human Rights Watch has actually released a report, and this is one of the links that I have below, talking about the security forces. The state operated security forces will arbitrarily arrest individuals and frequently abuse LGBTQ plus individuals. Uh, this is where a lot of the concern comes into play when it comes to the World Cup because obviously a lot of Western countries are, even though we're very poorly in our acceptance, we're significantly more accepting of individuals of the more than just heterosexual sexual identities.
Sure.
And so a lot of these fans like to travel. There's
Yeah, I was
also
going to say from the other countries.
from the other countries. So was massive and heavy concern because up until recently, Qatar was refusing to say what would happen to those fans.
Yeah, I was going to say, is there some kind of immunity for like people who are out of country, like foreigners like
There is
that?
not. So Qatar has since promised, and I think they promised this over the summer, that foreign nationals who are known homosexuals or known, I think they call them sexual deviants, that are known deviants or caught in the act of deviancy, as they would say, will not be prosecuted. If they're, as long as they're a foreign national and the other party involved is not a local kind of
Right,
thing.
right.
They've promised that they won't do anything. Guess how far that promise is probably going to carry, right? So, heavily advised if you are a member of the LGBTQ plus community, it's probably best to not go to Qatar. Period. Well, that's inexcusable
Period.
in and of
Point
itself,
blank. Point blank.
point blank. It's such that that the current FIFA president, Sepp Blatter, has actually said about members of this community, quoted as saying, "I would say they should refrain from any sexual activities when visiting the country." So he's essentially saying, "Hey, if you're not heterosexual and in a heterosexual relationship, um, don't do anything while you're over there because if you're caught, it's your fault."
Correct.
And that's the FIFA president saying this. That's FIFA who one of the main tenets of the organization is acceptance of all people, regardless of race, gender, or sexual identity. But they're giving Qatar a pass when it comes to their barbaric laws towards LGBTQ plus individuals and saying, hey, you know what, if you're going to go over there, they promise they won't do anything, but you shouldn't do anything to prompt them, that kind of
Right.
thing.
So
Yeah,
I would say other than the obvious like maybe financial implications, do you think there's any like maybe diplomatic motivations behind that? Like they don't want to start like any national, international incidents by appeasing to kind of Qatar's laws in terms of that? I'm just genuinely asking.
yeah, it's tough to know the motivation of it. I think a lot of it is because FIFA recognizes that Qatar's going to do what Qatar's going to do. Um,
Sure.
and so instead of trying to waste, quote unquote, waste their any diplomatic pressure that they can put onto them. They're instead just saying, okay, guys, please don't do gay things.
Sure.
Because it's they see it as easier to control the fans than to control the state they willingly gave the World Cup to.
Yeah. Yeah, which is
Yeah, it's not good.
just listen to that out loud. Just that's ridiculous.
Exactly. FIFA has also asked captains of the various countries competing to not wear rainbow armbands because it came out that I think so far 7 or 8 countries, England and the U.S. included, have the captains of those countries have said that they're going to wear rainbow armbands. Since the captain has to be identified by an armband on the field, they're going to wear
Right.
rainbow armbands that say some kind of slogan. I forget exactly what it is, but essentially, promoting LGBTQ plus rights. FIFA has
Sure.
asked them to not wear it. They've actually said in their
Doing
rules that these armbands aren't allowed. But what it sounds like is they're not going to punish anyone who does go ahead and wear it.
yeah, I was gonna say do it.
Yeah, so this is
I'd
going to
say do
be,
it.
yeah, we're going to see how many countries end up coming out and like, formally protesting through their captain with these kind of armbands. Other countries have taken some steps. Denmark is probably, I think it's Denmark, is the best example of this. They're actually, the people who make their kits actually put together like a all black alternative kit. That's supposed to be in the style of like mourning clothes, like MOURNING
Mm,
clothes, with the thought of representing all the migrant deaths, and they're going to be wearing those jerseys pretty much as they can,
right.
which is awesome. Yeah, they have like the Scandinavian countries have like just come out and like they're holding nothing back, and they're just going hard on Qatar and anyone who is qualified for the World Cup out of the Scandinavian countries are they're just like. I mean, the reason they're going is not to play soccer. They're going to just shove it in Qatar's face, and it is awesome to see, and I am here for it.
Good.
Yeah.
That's
Um,
all
but, and this is where it comes into my final point on all this. It's gotten bad enough though, with like fan groups protesting, countries doing their own thing, these captains coming out and saying what they're saying about wearing the rainbow armbands. FIFA just released a letter within the last week. I think I need to pull this up so I can represent it better. Let me see if I can find it. Um, it was an open letter from FIFA's president, who now is Gianni Infantino. So Step Ladder at the time said, hey, yeah, he's the FIFA president at the time. He doesn't want people committing sexual acts. Gianni Infantino, who is now the FIFA president, has come out and written an open letter to all the teams participating in the World Cup, so all 32 of them, essentially saying, please, let's now focus on football. To quote him, we know football does not live in a vacuum, football, of course, being soccer.
right. Right. Right.
And we are equally aware that there are many challenges and difficulties of a political nature all around the world. But please do not allow football to be dragged into every ideological and political battle that exists.
They're just trying to.
Does it
I mean,
sound familiar to you at
I
all?
was I was just about to say, and then looking at your point, your next header there.
Yep. This is
Yeah.
essentially them doing exactly what everyone was doing when NFL players were protesting the national anthem in support of Black Lives
Hey,
Matter.
yep, kneeling and all of that.
Kneeling or sitting on the bench, and everyone's like,
BAP.
yeah, don't bring your personal views into football. Don't bring blah blah blah, all this kind of stuff.
Shut up and
Exact same
dribble.
thing. Yeah,
Shut up and dribble.
exactly. Oh, man, and yeah, I don't watch the NBA. I should have included that because I know the NBA was huge on it too. Yeah, saying
Big time.
things like shut up and dribble, or shut up and play. Don't bring this onto the field. This is about this is about football. This is about basketball. This is about soccer. This is not about blah blah blah. It's just the most outdated, moronic ideology ever. But that's a whole thing in and of itself. FIFA has essentially come out and asked these players to not do any form of protesting. whatsoever, no matter how passive it is. That includes like wearing the armband, wearing those third kits I was talking about, all of those kind of things. They have like asked, like, please, let's just get through this. you know, let's not make this about politics, all this kind of stuff. Meanwhile, 6,500 migrant workers are dead. People are in
Yeah,
jail for being gay, and just any number of other violations that you can commit in Qatar that in the United States is just everyday life. It's just so frustrating to see this, organization. Um, that letter came out after I had decided I would not be watching the World Cup, but this letter solidified it. Is like,
sure.
yeah, not happening. I'll catch the scores on the next time. I hope the US does good. Fuck it. They're not getting a penny out of me though. For as much as I can possibly control my consumerism of the FIFA World Cup, I'm going to and prevent them from getting it because it's just ridiculous that not only is Qatar being allowed to host it, and not only is Qatar getting away with committing murder, basically, while hosting the World Cup and nobody's doing anything about it, but for FIFA to come out and say, hey,
I do a damn thing.
shut up and just play the game, stop making this about politics, I'm out,
Shut up and dribble. Shut up and dribble. Yeah, basically.
Yep.
The president. Where what country is he from? Just out of curiosity.
Gianni Infantino, I think he's Italian. Let me look real quick.
Or is it Sepp Blatter?
So Step Ladder was the one before Infantino. So,
Infantino. Sorry,
um,
current, yes.
yeah, Infantino's Swiss Italian. Let me see what Step Ladder was. He's Swiss.
Hmm.
He might be in jail now, actually. Oh
Really?
no, he's just banned from administrating anything FIFA related concerning the corruption case that Qatar definitely had nothing to do with.
I love how the first image of him is just a bunch of money flying around.
Right.
Because that isn't like
That doesn't tell you everything you need to know. Yeah. Um, yeah, no, Sepp Blatter was the guy who was in charge of FIFA when Qatar was picked to host the World Cup. And then Infantino is the one who has since taken over. I can't remember if there's anyone in between the two of them. Let me look. No, it's succeeded by, yeah, Infantino was the next one, who looks a heck of a lot like Jeff Bezos, strangely enough. Um,
only work.
the way FIFA presidency works is that like all the confederations. So there's I think it's five confederations around the world when it comes to soccer. The one that governs the U.S. is CONCACAF. So if you've ever seen signs for like those tournaments or whatever, UEFA is the big well-known one. That's the European one. CONMEBOL is the one that governs like America. AFCON is over Africa, and then for the life of me, I can't remember what the Asian one's called. I'd have to look, but essentially those are all their own run kind of like organizations, their own confederations, and then they all get together and their combined representation is FIFA. And then they all vote for a FIFA president. So it's typically the leader of one of those confederations then becomes FIFA president.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Makes sense.
So yeah, that's my issues with Qatar and the World Cup. Now,
Well, so I guess that kind of answered my question because I was going to say, like, knowing all this dirt, like, if they had the option to maybe like not make them the host city, but it sounds like they're bowing down.
that that's a fun one, right? So when the corruption cases all started to come out, and Qatar was never implicated by clearly seen, and then all the issues about Qatar itself, especially when it came to like the migrant workers, and then there was also like at the time a growing concern that they might not even have all the infrastructure set up in time, and like they're going to be, put nail in the final nail into place like the day the games are starting, kind of thing. They're not ready to host the World Cup as of now, and the World Cup starts in a couple of weeks. So they'll be putting together the final nails, like day of, and getting this all done. But because the vast majority of countries around the world, in fact, every country around the world, cannot all of a sudden host a World Cup. Came out, I think it was 2015. 2016 when all these concerns were kind of floating around. But the reason why the World Cup was not taken from Qatar is because it was seen that no country had the infrastructure in order to support a World Cup in such a quick turnaround. Quick turnaround being that, what is it, 7 years from that time to day of the World Cup starting. And that includes like, previous holders of the World Cup because a lot of those stadiums fall into disrepair or are just torn down, period, whatever the case may be. There's one country that could have done it though. And I bet you can guess who it is. I see you're muted. He may be on the phone.
My bad, my bad. Yeah.
You're good. But yeah, it was seen by FIFA that of all the 236 whatever countries in the world would not be able to hold a World Cup at the drop of the hat, excluding one. And that, of
Oh,
course,
okay.
is the United States.
Yeah.
We are the only country that had the infrastructure that could have taken it. Um, for whatever reason, though, FIFA decided that the negative things that were coming out of Qatar were not bad enough to then hand the World Cup over to the United States at this kind of drop of the hat.
Oh, yeah. That's
Probably because some people's bank accounts would have been emptied out pretty quickly.
I was gonna say 6,500 deaths, not good enough. Not
Yeah,
enough. Not enough.
yeah. So
Okay.
it was one of those things where it was an excuse by FIFA saying no country can do this in such a quick turnaround. Meanwhile, everyone in America is hopping up like, "Hello, hello, we're right here. Hello, we can do this." And FIFA's just like, "No, nobody's out there that can really kind of host this. It's too late. Sorry guys, we can't do anything." We're over there screaming at like a void because no one's listening to us saying, "We can host it. We have NFL and college football stadiums literally built to do this. We're good to go." Um, so yeah, it was willful ignorance. They kind of just put it off to the last second and then used an excuse as to why they couldn't take it away from Qatar. Um,
That's
yeah,
exactly what you just said. Willful ignorance, gosh.
yep, willful ignorance for it. So what we can do now is my very last slide, wrapping this all up towards America. Of course, like a lot of people, when they hear the thing of sports washing and then you give them all the examples, it's almost exclusively and always talked about in other countries outside of the United States. Um, you know, why do we need to care about it over here? Uh, One thing is that it kind of already exists in the US. We don't quite see it as negatively as like, a literal foreign state owning a team within the United States here. We don't have that kind of representation, but some things that can be seen as kind of loose, whatever, relation of sports washing when it does come to an individual's image, specifically in the United States, are things like when the first pitch at a baseball game happens. Think about any time a president who is had less than a 50% rating goes out and throws the first pitch at like a New York Yankees game. That's sports washing. People who participate in a coin toss, who may be seen as somewhat unsavory individuals, but participate in, say, flipping the coin at the Super Bowl. That's sports washing. And then pretty much any time the military grandstanding does happen at a sports game. So specifically things like flyovers, but other times a military unit of some sort may be involved in a sports game. That is a type of sports washing because typically things around the U.S. Military can be seen as a little bit negative when it comes to recruitment because a lot of the times is they're targeting the recruitment of individuals who have no other alternative when it comes to work, once they leave school or become of the age of 18. So the aggressive military propaganda when you're at a sports event can be seen as sports washing. There's some argument there. I can understand both sides of it, but that's just a good example of how it already exists within the U.S. The most recent example, though, that's huge and big as of this year, is golf. So, for those who don't know anything
The
about it,
golf?
golf. PGA has pretty much always been the tour in the United States, right? Like, if you want to be a pro golfer, you need to be a part of the PGA Tour. Well, Live has come out and taken quite a few big names away from the PGA. So they got names like Phil Mickelson and a whole bunch of other names that, even the most casual of sports fans would probably recognize. All quit PGA because PGA said if you're going to go to Live, you can't be a part of PGA anymore. Well, Live went and gave these guys multiple hundreds of millions of dollars to leave PGA and go play for them. Phil Mickelson's probably just the best example because he's probably the one golfer that you can say outside of Tiger Woods in the United States and everybody knows who he is. Live is also exclusively funded by the Saudi government, which is a fact a lot of people don't know. So now you got this big competition to PGA signing massive names to multi hundreds of millions of dollars and going out there and doing positive things for Live, promoting the tournament itself, promoting the tour itself, and all of it is because of Saudi money.
100%. That's did not know that one. I don't pay a lot of attention to golf though.
Right. Yeah,
So
it's definitely a certain circles that follow it and watch golf. It's
that's a little bit of a lesser known one.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And also, it had kind of that awful timing where Live was supposed to kind of launch and have its big fanfare in 2020. Then this other world event kind of happened that shut everything down. I don't know if you heard about it. It's called COVID. Uh,
Oh yeah, I think it
oh
was
yeah,
just
that
like the
one.
flu.
I think
Yeah,
I've
it was
heard
like the
about that
flu.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Liv had to kind of like limp along for a little bit, and then this year was supposed to be its big fanfare. Well, you're going up against, I mean, just all kinds of competition now this year. You got the World Cup, they were trying to do it in the summer. Well, everyone's just excited to be able to go out and do things now that all the COVID shut down. So Liv wasn't as um, didn't have as big of a come out party as they were kind of hoping for it. One of the other problems, though, is that they actually flat suppressed press from being involved in Live. They will not let reporters in. They will not let people who are parts of the media watch the tour or tournament. It's all strictly controlled by the administrators of Live. So essentially, what you're seeing on the TV are the exact same things the reporters at home are seeing because they're not allowed to be in there and doing things in person. Which, hey, you know what that sounds like? Sports washing. Funny enough. I talked about this a little bit earlier. The City Football Group, that's the organization operated out of Abu Dhabi who owns Manchester City. They also own a team in the United States, the NYFC or NYCFC, so New York City Football Club. Um, why it's not as big of a deal? One, NYCFC is essentially a feeder team to Manchester City. The City Football Group owns something like 8 or 9 teams all around the world in various leagues, and every single one of those teams acts as a feeder team to Man City. Think of it just like AAA teams in baseball that feed one major league team. That's essentially what City Football Group does. So it's less this ownership group based out of Abu Dhabi trying to promote themselves through NYCFC and more of them just using a cheap way to grow professional soccer players that they can then take to England and play for New York City FC.
Okay, okay.
On top of that, the MLS does have things like a salary cap. So while over in England, the sheiks, that's how you're supposed to say it, sheiks,
Is it
from
shakes?
It shakes, yeah. From Abu Dhabi, can pour hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions into the wage bill of Manchester City. You can't quite do the same thing here at all. There are some ways, some unique things that the MLS has that let you kind of expand your salary cap beyond the actual cap. But there's a whole lot of rules and limits put in place that essentially prevent teams from buying championships. So that's one of the reasons why it's not as huge of a deal, but there is a presence, there is a foothold, and who knows how that foothold can grow.
Sure.
Of the major teams, or sorry, leagues around the United States, so the top four: NHL, MLB, NBA, NFL, even the MLS to some extent, they all have some version of like an ownership or a fit and proper test that people have to go through before the owners of other teams in the league will approve a person to purchase a team. Um, for those of you who don't know, I'll have to see if I can find the video. If you ever want to see the greatest form of socialism in the entire world, don't look to any country, look to the NFL because it is legitimately the best form of socialism out there. It is socialism, period. There's no argument about it. And there's this great video that breaks it all down. So I'll definitely have to find it for you all. But essentially, when somebody wants to sell an NFL team, they first have to get permission from all the owners to sell the team, and
Right.
then they have to have permission for the person buying the team.
Sure.
Um, and a lot of the other leagues work in the exact same way. The problem is the EPL also had a fit and proper ownership test, and that has failed miserably multiple times. I mean, not only does the City Football Group own Man City, not only does Saudi Arabia own Newcastle, up until this year, thanks Ukraine, um, Robert Abramovich, who is like Putin's best friend in the entire world, owned Chelsea. So is this guy who is
Right.
using Chelsea as his own form of sports washing. Um, so it's failed multiple times in the EPL. It's after a certain point in time, even Jerry Jones will see the dollar signs brought in by a country like Saudi Arabia and probably fold. It's likely a matter of time. Just something to keep an eye on. One thing that does keep these people away, though, is salary caps. You can't pour hundreds of millions of dollars into a team and just buy a championship. I mean, obviously the Rams tried and to some extent succeeded at doing this,
I was gonna
but
say throw that to LA.
yeah, but they did it at the sacrifice of their season currently, and probably for quite a while because they don't have draft picks either. So like they bought it temporarily, they will not continue to own it, kind of deal. So that's what salary cap can really do. That's the big difference is that it prevents you from being able to buy championships. Any team in the NFL, no matter how much fun we make fun of them, still has a statistical chance of winning the Super Bowl, while in things like the EPL, you know who's going to win the EPL. It's going to be Manchester City.
Sure.
That's it. So the MLB and NBA don't quite have that salary cap limitation in place. There's ways to work around it. I mean, what the NBA, you just essentially pay more in taxes towards the league in order to buy the team that you want, right? Well, okay, so that won't be seen as too negative. And the MLB just flat out doesn't have a salary cap, so it's entirely possible that instead of the NFL, a place like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, whoever, could get their way in through those kind of leagues. But
Absolutely.
you know, their dream would be an NFL team, obviously.
Absolutely.
Another thing that does work in the favor of keeping America safe, and this is a bullet point I forgot to put on there and meant to do, is that we don't have promotion and relegation when it comes to our sports teams. Like we have the 32 NFL teams, and it's those 32 teams. Maybe at some point in time it'll expand, but it's not going to be like a minor league team promoted into the NFL, right?
Sure.
So what happened specifically? Man City's the best scenario. This like when Man City was bought by the sheikhs out of Abu Dhabi, they were in a lower tier. And then they were able to just pour money into that team, and they pretty much skipped right up the rankings because they were just outclassing everybody in the different leagues that they had to play in order to get to the EPL. And now that they're in the EPL, they can just continue to receive money funneled in. But you're not going to be able to do that with like a AAA team in the MLB and get them promoted to the MLB. So you have a limited pool of teams that you can buy from. If one does go for sale, you have to fit all these tests. And then on top of that, there's salary caps to prevent you from just buying a championship.
For now.
Problem is, certain individual over in Washington has decided to sell the Commanders.
Yeah, but I think he's been kind of like everybody's been wanting that though.
Yeah, and so that kind of meets the first step of selling an NHL or NFL team. The rest of the owners
Yeah.
don't want Dan Snyder around anymore, so
Yeah.
they're okay
The
with him
fans don't
leaving.
want him either. Yeah, the fans don't want him either.
Fans don't want him. Other owners don't want him. Everyone wants him gone. All right, great. Well, he went through
Right.
the rebranding, which he probably needed to do to sell the team anyways, because no one's going to go in to say, hey, yeah, you know, it sounds really good. Let me buy a team called the Redskins. Um,
Not this day and age. No.
no. So he's looking to sell the Commanders now. And in the most brilliant form of sports washing for an individual ever, the leading contender is Jeff Bezos. I think it's actually like a partnership between him and Matthew McConaughey, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
So if you want to
I
talk
think it's
up,
in Jay-Z involved in
I
that
think Jay
too.
Z is involved in it too. So it's going to be a conglomerate, but the vast majority of money is going to come from Jeff Bezos. Now,
Sure.
I'm never going to be somebody who will tell somebody to boycott something. I'm not going to be watching the World Cup. I've told Kate if she wants to, and she doesn't, but if she wants to, she can watch it. I just won't be in the room.
Sure.
I'm very fine if everybody out there who listens to this podcast watches the World Cup anyways. That's your choice. I'm here to lay out the facts. You decide if you want to watch the World Cup kind of thing. Um,
Sure.
and a lot of that is because I choose not to watch the World Cup. I don't want to tell other people to not watch it while then also fully participating in supporting companies that have questionable records. I'm one of the biggest fans of Amazon ever. I own Amazon Prime. I pay for it every year. I utilize Amazon frequently. And while fully understanding why people want to boycott Amazon and the negative things that come from there, the convenience that
Right.
Amazon offers me and the products that they give me, to me, are worth it, right? Obviously I don't want, the bad things that are happening at Amazon to continue to
You
happen. I want them
continue.
to go away, but I'm going to continue to use the product. So I don't want to be one of those people who's like, do not watch the World Cup. World Cup bad, 6,500 people are dead kind of thing. And then
Sure.
have somebody respond, well, you still support Amazon and here's all the bad things about Amazon. So I'm not going to be
Sure.
one of those people to be out there um, protesting against it, but I also fully understand why people do not like Jeff Bezos and why he has a bad image. And it's just the fact that he's a billionaire alone does give him, somewhat of a negative image because why do people, need to have that amount of money is the perception seen there. Him
Right.
purchasing the Commanders, taking away Dan Snyder, who is kind of America's version of Mike Ashley out of Newcastle, um, getting rid of him as a negative force and Bezos stepping in is a form of sports washing and is what
Sure.
will happen if Bezos buys the Commanders because people will see a positive light. Washington fans, especially, will see, oh, thank God Dan Snyder's gone. We now have Jeff Bezos in charge of us.
And you got a likable guy like McConaughey on his
McConaughey.
side, and Jay-Z, people like him too. So,
Love Jay
yeah,
Z. Yeah.
yeah,
So that's something to keep in mind is like sports washing doesn't always just also mean what you're actually purchasing. It means the people you're working with. That's where that whole buying fan support when it comes to the World Cup is a negative thing. Massive stars in the soccer sphere. David Beckham, probably recognizable to Americans, has been over in Qatar for about the past month and change, living there and just talking up how awesome this World Cup is going to be.
mm,
And that's, a form of sports washing. And it's a very unfortunate thing to see because I was a huge fan of David Beckham. I think he's an amazing soccer player. I've always, liked the product he put out there. He owns a team over here in Miami, Inter Miami, and now
yeah,
he's been out there shelling shamelessly because Qatar has paid him a lot of money to do it. And it's the same thing with like Jeff Bezos and Matthew McConaughey. Bezos wants McConaughey and Jay Z there because Bezos understands he's not a likable product.
Right, by himself. It makes him look good.
But yeah,
Absolutely.
McConaughey and Jay-Z do make him look good. So,
Absolutely.
yep. And that's all I really had about all of this. So, it's important to watch out from an American perspective,
For
not
sure.
because it's not because it's actively happening right now, but because it's inevitable to happen. And it has to be on the fans in order to stop these kind of things from occurring through forms of protest, signing petitions, whatever noise that you can make, and helping make sure that the truly bad actors of the world, not just people like Jeff Bezos, but the truly, genuinely terrible people of the world, do not get a foothold in American sports because we see how awful it's turned out for the rest of the world, and we just don't want that.
So I mean, yeah, and it comes down to like, the whole idea where, back to what they want us to do when, everyone wants to keep their politics out of sports, right? Keep
Right.
politics out, keep it to sports. It's always bigger than sports. There's always something bigger than sports, and it's usually politically motivated, as we can see kind of with this what's going on here. So yeah, it's a business, you know what I'm saying? Like it's
Hmm.
never just about the sports.
They want to keep the politics out of sports that cast them in a bad light and keep the politics in sports that make them look good. And that's the whole goal with sports washing here.
100%,
Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
So it's things to keep out for. Don't drink the Kool-Aid, as everyone says. Always be critical of the people around you. I'm in no way, shape, or form saying that every single person who owns an NFL team right now is a good human being outside of Dan Snyder. Like, anyone who's rich enough to own an NFL team probably has some skeletons in the closet. And it's important to recognize that while also recognizing that there are people out there who are significantly worse that can get in the door simply because somebody is willing to say, oh, well, my current owner is a bad guy. Anyone would be better than him. And then you quickly find out you're replacing a little crybaby owner with somebody like Hitler. You know what I mean? Like, the grass is always greener on the other side until you get to the other side. And it would be awful to see these genuinely bad actors get a foothold in America more than they already have, simply because somebody thought the grass would be greener on the other side.
Sure. And it's not like you're saying that Bezos is the same as the people over in Saudi
Oh,
Arabia, but
hell
it's
no.
just kind
Yeah.
of, yeah, it's just an example of
Yeah.
someone using this practice just kind of on a different,
Yeah,
a
because
little bit of a lower perspective.
yeah,
Yeah,
because like
but
I was just saying, like I'm a huge fan of Amazon, and I like what Jeff Bezos did with the company. I don't like everything I hear coming out of it, but I would hope that the labor laws that exist help get those things knocked into order versus it,
sure.
being something I'm solely blaming Jeff Bezos for. I'm fine if Bezos wants to buy the Commanders. Where it
Yeah.
becomes an issue is like, okay, we start letting Bezos in here with no checks. Then what about when the Browns want to sell, or when the Raiders want to sell, or whoever wants to sell, and then all of a sudden MBS is showing up at our front door saying, I got the money to buy the team, and then we're like, oh, okay, why not?
Right.
That's what we need to look at and avoid. Plus,
You
I also
got
understand why people wouldn't want Jeff Bezos to own the team.
just let the State of the Kingdom podcast team will all pull our money together and we'll try to match
Yeah,
we'll
I
try
got.
to match Bezos'
Yeah,
offer.
yeah. Let me show you my bank statements and let's see how quickly you retract that statement, huh? Oh man, wouldn't that be
Absolutely.
some? We would run a hell of a team. Okay, so here's what I was thinking though, right? If I had won the Powerball,
Right.
I was
Dude, this
laying
is
in bed last night. If I had won the Powerball, would I be willing to buy the Commanders? I was thinking yes, but only if they would let me change it back to Washington football team, because that would be
yes, that's
my
how we would
first
do
act.
it. Exactly. That was, you know what? It was a silly name, but it kind of worked.
It
It kind
works.
of worked.
It works. Oh man.
But
So yeah. Any
yeah,
questions, thoughts?
not really. No, definitely. I think I asked kind of all my questions kind of during the discussion. Definitely enlightening though. It's just something to think about. Like, we love the game. We love sports. And it's all fun and games. It's a sense of escapism for a lot of people. That term gets used a lot, but
Hmm.
at the end of the day, there's always something bigger going on, and it's not always good.
Right.
So,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like the last thing I want to be thinking about is, things like politics or, my own financial struggles as I'm getting through the day, healthcare, like all the things that is a crushing day-to-day object. And I sit down and watch 3.5 hours, 4 hours of the Chiefs play. I want to be able to watch the sports, but we also have to recognize that like if that's all we do, then it will become a bad thing.
Things slip through the cracks.
Exactly. So while it's in a perfect world what we want, we need to recognize that we are not in a perfect world and that we have to let politics intrude on these in order to ask the tough questions that we so actively try to avoid every day.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, yeah. Yeah, I think that's main idea we can end on. Um, and I do appreciate you putting this together, man. I hope if you listen to this, whether you liked it or hate it, I hope maybe you can give your input on it,
Yeah.
give your thoughts kind of on this discussion. If you like this idea, we do plan on having just maybe more of these. Maybe during the season, maybe we'll try to get a few of them. But I know we'll have probably a lot more during the off season.
Yeah, this really did kind of start off this off season with us doing like a lot of pop culture look
Yeah,
at
yeah.
movies, especially that kind of stuff, and I think that's what we would definitely want a lot of these sideline discussions to be focused on. Um,
I mean, they can be whatever.
they can be whatever though,
It's like a
exactly.
sideline discussion.
Yeah, and this is an important enough topic that it does need to be covered and talked about, especially how relevant it is with the World Cup coming over. But
Absolutely.
I think if
I
anyone
was,
out there has thoughts about other sideline discussions, I'd
I
love to
was just
hear it.
about to say,
Yeah.
yeah, if y'all have ideas, give them to us. We'd love to hear it.
Yeah, we can talk about how much fun we had in our film class at KU and talking about. Oh
Oh my
man,
God, I
that,
do remember that. I forgot you were in that class.
yeah. Oh
I didn't
man,
go. I skipped so much.
right. Oh,
Anyway, that's another discussion.
that's a whole nother thing. Yeah, no, talk about film. We could talk about current events. We can talk about anything. And I know it. Yeah, like you're saying, if you all have any thoughts about sports washing, about its impact in America, the World Cup as a whole, definitely leave comments. I'll
Leave them in
reply
the
to them all.
comments.
I'll
Leave them in
reply
the
to every single
comments.
one of them.
Absolutely.
Oh God, I
Well,
just
yeah,
opened
man.
myself up to absolute hell though. Just like if somebody just starts flooding in. But hey, let's
I
do
would
it.
be interested. I would be interested to see how people feel. I mean, I think you made a solid case against Cutter for sure. I'd be interested to see how people feel about kind of the influence here in the States.
Yeah, yeah, I would love to hear that, especially when it comes to bad owners. We've been really lucky in Kansas City, especially when it comes to the Chiefs, to have the Hunt family.
The Hunts are great,
Yeah, they're absolutely awesome. I mean, they let, oh gosh, what
as
was
far
his
as we
name?
know.
Yeah, right, exactly. Right, right. Um, I mean, it's like they've had their ups and downs in some of their administration practices and all that, but overall, the Hunts have always been a positive influence in Kansas City. And then, Sporting had some really bad ownership, and the original women's soccer team had some really bad ownership, but both of those things have been fixed, especially with the group who owns Sporting now, and then the new women's soccer team that has come in. Uh, I know the Royals have had their ups and downs, but they've always been pretty well respected. I feel from the fact that the Royals know who they are. They know they're not going to be a team to compete for the World Series every year, so everyone's just
Sure,
happy to have the Royals kind of deal. Yeah, overall sports, at least in the last 10, 15 years, excluding the first edition of the women's team here, fantastic ownership.
sure.
So we've been lucky. I
And
want to hear from other fan bases who haven't been as lucky.
yeah, and I'd actually be curious, maybe as they get closer to once more things come out about the Dan Snyder cell, maybe we could make it part of the main show. I know we're not really a commander show at all, but like, I mean, that's related to kind of what we talk about on the main show. Or if we feel like we need to branch it into one of these, we can definitely do it as well.
I love it.
Like just kind of more seeing what that's going to look like once it's finalized.
Mm, absolutely.
But yeah, man. Uh,
2 hours strong,
well,
it seems.
yes, sir. We
I
are
didn't
109,
realize.
109.
Oh
Yeah.
man.
Let them know where to find you, man.
Yeah, so up top you can see my Twitter handle at Chef Doobles. That's the best place to find me for all communication-based purposes. I also have my own YouTube channel, youtube.com/@ symbol Chef Doobles. I've been I know I think I've said it every single episode and I haven't really done it. Been trying to get back into streaming video games and whatnot. Haven't been as active on it, so I need to be. But you know, that's another place to find me. And what about you?
And you can find me on the Almighty Raw on Instagram and Twitter. Find our show, State of the Kingdom, SOT Kingdom KC on Twitter, State of the Kingdom on YouTube. We are going to try to get back on Apple and Spotify again soon. I've been looking at options for that. And join our Discord, please. I'm gonna
Yes.
be really shooting that out there a lot these next couple weeks.
Yes, please, please, please. So I guess we'll see you all there.
Absolutely. Well, until next Tuesday, we will be back on the mics again. We hope y'all have a great weekend, get to enjoy some football, and I don't know if it feels appropriate to say go Chiefs, but we'll see y'all next time.
All right, there
Yeah,
we
we
are.
didn't really talk about them
We-
today.
oh man.